Some time later, Rent continued hunting monsters there to increase his XP. Day by day, he lived as an undead and began to adapt to the situation. Rent's body condition improved because he could easily attack monsters. The powers he learned as a human, mana, spirit, and divinity, had also increased. Typically, people only had 2 of these powers, but Rent had possessed all 3 for a long time, a rarity. Rent could channel mana and spirit into his sword. He felt his current strength was much greater than when he was still human. Soon, Rent heard the sound of a sword clashing nearby. It was a beautiful girl named Rena fighting a skeleton. After Rena defeated the skeleton, she took its magic stone and prepared to explore the labyrinth again. Rent had a comprehensive memory of adventurers in the city of Malt, but he didn't recognize Rena, assuming she was a new adventurer. Rent actually wanted to ask for the girl's help to return to the city. Unfortunately, he couldn't reveal himself to Rena directly. Rent continued to follow wherever Rena went, and a skeleton appeared near her. According to Rent, Rena had good basic sword skills, but the power behind her sword swings was still insufficient to defeat the skeleton. Moreover, Rena didn't pay much attention to her opponent's subtle movements. Rena was struggling against the skeleton as a novice adventurer. When Rena was in a tight spot, Rent saved her and introduced himself. Though Rent initially had some difficulty speaking, Rena eventually understood what he meant. Rena was surprised to meet a talking ghoul and asked why he looked that way. Was he disguising himself? Rent slowly explained that he was actually dead but somehow came back to life. Seeing Rena's fear and wariness, Rent even put away his sword. Rena expressed gratitude to Rent for saving her. Rena also asked if she could safely exit the labyrinth. She still thought Rent might kill her. However, Rent reassured her once again that he wouldn't harm her. Instead, he asked for Rena's help in buying clothes. Rent handed his money, and Rena could take her share later. Rent truly wanted to return to Malt City. After that, Rent distanced himself a bit from Rena to avoid making her feel threatened. Rena took the money and introduced herself to Rent. Rena was the daughter of a knightly family and promised to repay Rent's kindness. She asked Rent to wait in the labyrinth, and Rena began to leave, vigilant of Rent's movements. Rent knew the risks he would face later. Typically, if adventurers found a ghoul or monster like Rent, they would report it to the Adventurer Guild. However, Rent chose to trust the girl because Rena didn't seem like a traitor. On the other hand, Rena quickly returned to Malt City and went to the Adventurer Guild to inquire about something from Sheila. Some time passed, and Rent continued hunting monsters inside the labyrinth. His body had developed good combat reactions, and he felt his vision was much sharper than that of an ordinary human. Soon, Rena shouted Rent's name, bringing many items for him. After hearing this, Rent headed to the entrance of the Moon's Reflection Labyrinth. Of course, Rena wanted to ensure that it was the real Rent and not another monster. Rent replied that monsters wouldn't usually walk like him. It was Rena calling out that attracted him. They both looked awkward because the situation was truly beyond human comprehension. Rena felt that Rent's speech had become smoother compared to their first meeting. Even though Rent had told her to keep the change earlier, Rena returned the money. She explained that all the items were recommended by the Adventurer Guild. As Rent approached, Rena started moving away from him as she was still somewhat afraid and not used to seeing a ghoul like him. Rena also apologized to Rent. Rent told her there was no need to apologize, as it was a natural reaction when someone encountered a monster like him. Rena explained that she also bought some equipment to cover specific parts of Rent's body. Certainly, Rent felt very fortunate to meet such a caring and kind girl. Rent wanted to cry, but tears didn't come. He cried through his emotions, even though he didn't have a heart in his body. I couldn't help but feel sorry for Rent's current fate compared to when he was still human. When Rent tried on the robe Rena bought, he looked truly gallant like a knight, and Rent really liked the clothes. Then, Rena was pleased after seeing Rent's response, and she also bought a black mask to cover Rent's frightening face. Honestly, Rena thought that Rent was a rare monster in this labyrinth, and Rent justified Rena's thoughts because it was the truth. When Rent tried the mask, it suddenly adhered to his face. Despite Rent attempting to remove it and using his divinity power, the mask still wouldn't come off. Of course, Rena was surprised because she didn't know that the mask possibly had a cursed effect. She had checked the aura of the mask and found no curse within it. Rena bought the mask from a small vendor at a very cheap price. Rena thought that Rent's appearance could be cooler with the mask, and she didn't want others to avoid or be afraid when communicating with Rent. Rena sincerely apologized to Rent. Then, Rent told Rena that she didn't need to worry about it. Rent was confident that the mask would come off someday. He would gather money to seek help from someone with high divinity power. Rent approached Rena, who still had her head bowed to him. However, Rent restrained himself from touching Rena. Then, Rena bravely tried to hold Rent's hand. She said that she understood what Rent was feeling now. Rent wasn't a bad person, and Rena could trust him. Although Rena said that, her hands still trembled when holding Rent's hand.
ありがとう。いつか本当になれるまでは。
Rena also offered to help and accompany Rent to Malt City. During the journey, Rena explained that she had registered as an adventurer in the capital. However, there were many famous adventurers there, and no quests matched Rena's abilities. Due to this, Rena came to Malt City to find something she could work on. Rena was very happy to come to Malt City because she could go anywhere she wanted to become the strongest adventurer.
俺みたいなかなりレア。だが冒険者は臆病くらいがいい。命は一つだ。
After they arrived the gates of Malt City, Rent said that many people knew him there, so he wanted to enter through another gate. Rent also thanked Rena for helping him so far. He didn't want to inconvenience Rena further. Rent realized that he was an undead monster, and Rena might face problems if she brought him into the city. Most likely, Rena could lose her adventurer status for bringing Rent into the city. After hearing this, Rena insisted on helping Rent get into the city. Rent had saved her life, so at least Rena was willing to risk her fate for Rent. Then, they were allowed by the guards to enter the city after the guards verified their identities. However, the guards were suspicious of Rent's appearance since it was their first time seeing him. They even asked Rent to remove his mask. Then, Rena told the gate guards that Rent had suffered severe injuries while fighting monsters, resulting in his body and voice becoming strange. Because of that, Rena helped him buy clothes and a mask. However, Rena didn't know that the mask actually had a curse and couldn't be removed from Rent's face. Rena had tried to remove it, but it wouldn't come off. They needed to gather money to pay the church to remove the mask. Rent told the gate guards to try removing the mask to make them believe Rena's story.
呪いを解いてもらうには教会にかなりの寄付が必要です。
リナのおかげありがとう。
They finally managed to enter Malt City thanks to Rena's false story, and Rent was very grateful to her. While Rena was figuring out their next destination, Rent suddenly disappeared from Rena's view. It turned out that Rent deliberately left quietly using his powers to avoid causing more trouble and involving Rena further. In his mind, Rent promised that he would meet Rena again when he had a better appearance than what he currently had. He was confident that Rena would become a great adventurer someday. Rena was a kind and smart girl, and she took good care of her equipment. At night, Rent went straight to the house of his old friend, Lorraine Vivi. Rent knocked on her door as usual, but there was no response from Lorraine. Then, Rent tried to enter Lorraine's house, and it turned out that Lorraine was sleeping peacefully on her sofa. Rent woke up Lorraine, and she was shocked to see Rent's current condition.
何があった